Hey folks, excited to bring you another great episode of Vagabond VC. Today's episode continues our journey through Peru with my guest Luis.narro. He's a venture partner at Alaya Capital. Luis has been heavily involved with the startup and venture capital scene in Peru, previously working with the Development Bank of Peru, known as COFIDE, on launching their fund of funds in the country, and most recently holding a position as the executive director of PECAP, Peru's Venture Capital Association. Luis and I talk about his journey through the VC world and some of the current trends in Peru. So I am excited to bring you this episode as we further explore the Peruvian startup ecosystem. So with that said, let's get on with the show. So Luis, I want to jump in and talk to you about some of the trends going on in the ecosystem here in Peru. But first, I want to learn more about you. So what is your background and how did you get involved in the startup and venture capital ecosystem here in Peru?
It was at my time at COFIDE, which is the Development Bank of Peru. We were doing a project to develop a fund of funds for venture capital. So at that time, they needed someone to do like the research part and build the first proposal of the fund of funds. So that was my role for almost a year and a half back in 2016, 2015. Then I jumped into a Swiss cooperation program called 3CP. We worked there with incubators, accelerators, funds, different kind of supporting organizations to entrepreneurs. And I was able there to develop PECAP with a couple other angel investors at that time. And PECAP started for me as a volunteering project. You know, I forgot to mention, but PECAP is Peru's Venture Capital Association. And eventually this grew into a full-time job in which I was able to be the executive director for a couple of days, until a couple of days ago. And well, currently now I'm at Alaya, a venture capital firm operating in Latin America.
Well, congrats on the new role. And actually, I didn't even notice COFIDE when I was doing my research, but that's a really interesting topic to actually jump into real quick because you mentioned that you were working on the fund of funds. So recently I was talking to some other individuals in the ecosystem, Evelyn Gomez, she's at UTech Ventures, as you know, and she was mentioning the fund of funds, and also Greg at AVP, and he mentioned this fund of funds. It's my understanding that this actually hasn't been put in place yet. Is that correct, or how does that operate?
No, they are already receiving proposals from funds, and probably they will have one or two investments in the next few months. It is operating, and yeah, that was a great news when it was all approved, like the legal stuff, and you know, because this is a public program.
So how is that fund of fund, do you think, how is it going to affect the ecosystem here?
Yeah, so I think the government here has done a very good job ever since like 2015, 14, when they started supporting the ecosystem. They have provided capital for more than 500 startups, like more than 30 incubators, 3 angel networks, even like pre-operation costs for a VC fund. So I think they did an amazing job to develop like organizations around the ecosystem. And now this fund of funds will target specifically the need for capital. Because what we saw in Peru a couple of years ago was that there were startups that were already like developing some seed rounds or pre-Series A rounds. But there was a big gap in Series A or plus rounds, you know. So what we told the government is, okay, this is going to be a problem for startups to continue growing, regardless of all the support that you have provided before. So they decided to look at the programs that were already operating in Mexico, Colombia, in a way also Chile, and decided to build their own fund of funds to foster like local supply for growth stages or for early stages.
So it contributes to that Series A and onward phase. Like you mentioned, there's a gap there. So startups here have access to capital at the seed level when they're first launching, getting product market fit, and that gap comes afterward. At the seed level, where is that capital typically coming from?
Right now it's basically angel investments, and there are also some seed funds operating in Peru. But even right now with the pandemic, this part of the spectrum has weakened a little. Like there are less angel investors being active in Peru. And what we've seen in the last 2 years is that the international source of capital is growing like very much Back in 2018, it was about 67% of the investments in Peruvian startups coming from abroad. Now it's over 90%. So yeah, because startups are growing and they don't find the enough capital here in Peru, and they have to go to other places such as the U.S., Mexico, Argentina, or where these other funds actually operate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in Latin America, I've noticed in general most of the funds are regional based, right? So, like I mentioned, AVP, Angel Ventures. Well, Angel Ventures is based out of Mexico, but the Angel Ventures Peru focuses on Peru. Now, Alaya, which you just started working for, they're regionally focused as well, right? How does their fund play here in Peru?
Yeah, so I will be venture partner here in Peru. My role is to provide the deal flow, also like investor relations. In addition, also support the portfolio, like have a soft landing here in Peru. So as myself, there is a person in Colombia also as a venture partner. There's also one in Mexico, and there are two of the two managing partners. One is based in Chile and Argentina, and we are looking also to have a managing partner in Miami. So the strategy that we want to develop is helping the companies scale regionally by having these different people in the relevant markets that we have identified for the fund.
The current fund you're investing out of with Alaya, how big is that fund, and do you have a specific amount allocated to Peru, or how does that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Right now we are raising our third fund.
Okay.
This is going to be an 80 to 100 million US fund operating in what we call Spanish-speaking LATAM. So basically everything except Brazil, perhaps, because we always think of Brazil as a separate continent. And yeah, well, for Peru, our goal is to allocate at least 20% of the fund, which can be either in Peruvian startups or also these startups that are landing in Peru to develop operations, and that's approximately like 16 to 20 million in the next 5 years.
Now, before this current role, you were at PECAP or PECKAP, and obviously they have a big kind of contribution here in the ecosystem. So could you explain kind of what they do and what specifically you were doing for them?
Yeah, so PECAP is the organization that represents venture capital investors in Peru. We want to make venture capital more relevant in terms of public policies, putting it also in media. We want to provide data for the ecosystem to see how the ecosystem is evolving in terms of investments. So we had a lot of activities on that side, and we also had a couple of events. Our main event being the Peru Venture Capital Conference. So yeah, that's like in a nutshell what we did at PECAP. And my role was to do a little bit of everything. As the executive director of a young organization, we don't have more than 3 years, maybe 2 years of real operations. So yes, we have grown a lot. In PECKA, I'm still talking like first person because I feel really identified with the organization. Yeah. And well, Alaya is also part of PECKA, so in a way that's correct. And we've grown from 5 founding organizations to 50 to date. And what we've seen is a lot of new organizations like corporates or maybe law firms that were not traditionally involved in venture capital, wanting to reach out to us and see how they can collaborate in the ecosystem.
And what's their main motivations for wanting to get involved? I think that answer might be obvious to us, but if you could put yourself in the shoes of one of those corporations that wasn't traditionally involved in startups, innovation, venture capital, what do you think is motivating them to get more involved here?
Yeah, I think that like I was listening to a podcast also before, and the fear factor is always there. This corporate scene that people like Rappi are getting more relevant, Nubank, before Mercado Libre. All of these companies are not anymore startups. They're like big companies on their way to being even more relevant in the region. So I think there's this fear factor that corporates want to have at least wanting to see who are the players, which are the startups developing, and eventually maybe collaborate in a way or directly do some investments there. And I also think the last few months in Latin America have put the whole region in the eyes of everyone. For the first semester, depending on the source you use, but LAFCA said that there were more than 6 billion US dollars invested in the region, and CB Insight said that more than 9 billion US dollars. Well, both are correct in that only that semester is bigger than any of the past years. So I think that also brought a lot of attention of bigger players wanting to have a little bit more presence in the ecosystem and see what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. And yesterday I was talking to Martin Espiaga, Salcantay, and he brought up SoftBank and their role in the ecosystem. Just this morning, I read another TechCrunch article about how they're even getting more involved. So like, just outside capital continues to keep pouring in here. And yeah, I think your point is correct. And incumbents afraid of being disrupted. And hopefully what their involvement does is actually helpful in terms of them acquiring. So your involvement here has been pretty broad over the last few years, and you've been able to actually see firsthand some of the challenges and opportunities here. So on that note, when it comes to starting a company, being an entrepreneur, what are some of the key challenges that are here in this local marketplace?
Yeah, so we actually asked that to our audience at the Peru Venture Capital Conference in the edition in 2020 and this one too in 2021. And they agreed that in both years that it was supply of capital. So still like entrepreneurs think that the main challenge for the ecosystem in Peru is access to capital. And I think it makes sense, and even more with the pandemic in a way. As I said, that the local supply of capital is a little bit weaker than before. But what is good also on the other side of the coin is that the integration of Latin America is stronger. So you have Peruvian startups pitching to Mexican investors without the need to go to Mexico City, right? That happened before in a way, but not quite. Now it's a little bit more normal to have just Zoom calls regardless of where you are. And the other thing that they answered was the lack of public support. That was an answer this year. And I think this has to do maybe with how the public programs stopped during the pandemic. Okay. We had before a contest for startups called Startup Peru, and this contest has not operated in the last 2 years due to the pandemic. But I also think it has to do with some regulation issues. Startups, we used to know that had a lot of issues when they hired international services, and it could be like cloud services or social media stuff, and they were overtaxed for them. I think that has a lot to do, and also the ones developing probably something stronger with R&D also see that there's some limitations and gaps that don't allow them to develop that much innovation here in Peru.
In terms of some of the policies around like taxation, things like that, and outsourcing, how was that feedback received? Because you mentioned with PECAP's involvement with some policymakers. Was that feedback that was ignored, or do you think it was that people were receptive to and actually want to facilitate change to help, sort of make things easier for startups to operate?
Yeah, I haven't seen and I don't want to talk about like politics or anything, but I haven't heard in any presidential candidate that we had some clear strategy for developing innovation or tech entrepreneurship or anything related to this. I think our political leaders are still thinking a little bit behind of the times, not seeing that there is a big opportunity to continue developing this in a bigger scale. Because it is true that we've had this public support from the Ministry of Production mainly, and now with COFIDE being involved in the Fund of Funds. But I think what we need to do is like a strategy to integrate like the whole ecosystem and develop something for startups, something for funds, something for corporates. Maybe analyze these regulation frameworks with the lens of seeing if they are friendly to develop innovation. What we had in the last 2 years was some changes in terms of capital markets topics. For example, we had our crowdfunding law passed in just a few months ago, and a couple of weeks ago the fintech sandbox was also approved. Oh, wow. With some restrictions because it is, I'm not an expert on this topic, but the experts say that this is more friendly to corporates that want to develop some new products, not necessarily like young companies that can develop fintechs from scratch. So yeah, I think what we lack is maybe a little bit more leadership into where we want to take this topic in the next 10, 20 years, and developing like projects that can help us reach to that vision.
Well, I think it's frequently, and not just in Peru, but I think everywhere, where policy lags behind innovation, right? But on the crowdfunding piece, that's really interesting because I can say specifically, at least from an American viewpoint, that when we had our Jobs Act, which I think was in 2012, and they introduced crowdfunding, like it democratized investing to like a serious degree, and they're still innovating on, you know, how people can participate, but and I don't know all the details of the law here in Peru. This is actually the first time I'm hearing about it, so it's great that I get to research it. But if it allows, you know, individuals access to these companies and this equity, it's only a good thing.
Yeah, it does. So it's been regulated for equity and for debt. And the first company that has been approved under this new framework was approved a couple of weeks ago.
On a similar note, so we just talked about the challenges to entrepreneurship, and we dived into this a little bit on the funding side. So you mentioned COVID-19. There are issues with individuals who were, I guess, traditionally angel investors in this market taking a step back. You mentioned that this fund of fund is in place to, you know, allocate capitals to that next stage. And you also mentioned that now with COVID-19, some of these traditional barriers or borders that would have existed have started coming down. So, for example, Mexican investors speaking with Peruvian entrepreneurs. But here locally, I'm actually really interested to understand what the capital is like in Peru. So there were these angel investors. There are people with potentially high net worth, but they're not really involved in venture capital per se. So why do you think that is?
For once, like the big institutionals, like the numbers don't make sense yet. Like big pension funds require a little bit like bigger funds what we have here in Peru. Although I was talking to a person in this area a few days ago, and they want to explore like how they can maybe develop a special instrument to work with the ecosystem, because they see it more relevant as time goes by, right? And the other thing is probably they don't know that we have that many players in Peru. Probably they think that venture capital is still like an American or a European topic, and not that developed in Latin America. Even like the big funds like the CASEX or Moneshis in the region are not quite known by this player, who maybe prefer to invest in other like types of assets, and like venture capital is not a priority to date, right? Yeah, I think we do lack a little bit about that, but if you see who are the angel investors in Peru, you find a lot of people that work for big investment firms and also for big corporates. So probably it's also a matter of time, and that they can learn a little bit more, feel more confident, and be a little bit more risky in their strategy for venture capital.
No, that's a really good perspective. So as we're getting towards the end here, where do you see the future of venture capital and startups in Peru? Where, say like 5 years from now, where do you think this is heading?
Yeah, so I think the COFIDE's fund of funds will do the job to attract like more international investment, as it is the case of Alaya, for example, and other funds that are looking at Peru because of the fund of funds. I think that's a good point. Also, the local funds will be able to have more capital to invest in Peruvian startups, because COFIDE will require that this money is either invested in a Peruvian company or in a company that is operating or wants to operate in Peru. So that will for sure have an impact on the ecosystem in the next 5 years. And I also see that there will be more integration with the region.
All right, Luis, thank you so much for your time here. Once again, I'm with luis.narro, a venture partner at Alaya Capital. So thank you again.
Well, thank you, Seb, and to everyone that listens to the podcast. I think this is a great opportunity to go deeper in LATAM. Get to know the players and get to know some companies because they're doing really interesting stuff.
Oh, one last question before we go. What is a good way for individuals to reach you?
To anyone that wants to reach out to me, like I'm at LinkedIn, Luis Narro. Happy to receive any invitations and to chat about this opportunity.
Okay, I'll put that link in the show notes. All right, Luis, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Seb.